think about it.
That's true.
Ooh, okay, so
Augusta County.
We're live again, huh? We're good to go, Anne-Marie?
Give it a hot second. I was just still had a loading bar, but I think we're good to go now.
Okay.
Yes, part of the theme. This is part of the.
That's right. We had our own
topic.
epic fail this evening. We were booted off Facebook, but we are back, hopefully for real this time. And I think we got kind of the theme of the evening. So I think we got cut off in our introduction. So real quick, I'll go around the room again. Again, my name is Travis Shaw with the Mosby Heritage Area. I'm going to be talking about a failure of a 19th century canal company here in Virginia, and I'm drinking Batting 1000 from Beltway Brewing. Anne-Marie, what do you got?
I'll be talking about Elijah Hobart. His story, it involves everything. Sharpshooters, snow, a canal, the 4th of July, just all kinds of fun things in his series of unfortunate events style life during the Civil War. And I am drinking Coast by Crooked Run Brewery.
Joe Rizzo, director of the Loudon Museum. What do you have for us tonight?
I am going to talk about the failed Washington Peace Conference of 1861. Just so you know, it does fail, and then there's a Civil War after. That's how you know it failed so badly. And I will be drinking Wraith by Vanish Brewery. It's an awesome wit beer. Vanish Brewery is in northern Leesburg.
Great. And our special guest for tonight is Kate Gruber from the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation, and she has a lot of great stuff for us this evening. What do you have, Kate?
Well, I keep trying to talk about the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe. But while doing that, I am also trying not to drink an entire growler full of Semester Abroad, which is a really great porter by the Virginia Beer Company here in Williamsburg.
Great. So since we're already a little behind schedule here, we're going to jump right into Kate's story. So tell us about the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe, finally.
All right. I'm going to try to just pick it right up. We're gonna quit with the introductions and just go right in. It's 1716. Lieutenant Governor of Virginia Alexander Spotswood is getting a lot of push from King George about really opening up Western Virginia to settlement and further expansion and things like that. So he decides that he is going to really champion that cause, and he is going to lead a group of adventurers through the Blue Ridge and basically claim that territory in the name of the king and in the name of Virginia for future settlement. So this is a really, really popular story that people really love in Virginia. And it basically goes like this. It is August 29th, 1716, and about 50 guys meet up in Germanna. About 15 of them are actually Virginia gentry. So these are your William Byrds, who I had a little list of people who are actually supposed to be on this expedition. George Mason, the third, William Byrd the second, Fairfax, George Wythe, a couple Lees, John Randolph, Beverly is a part of this group. So this is like the muckety muck of Virginia. These are the people that you really do not expect to be like traipsing through the woods and killing bears and things like that. This is just not their normal scene, but they're doing it because I think they're all trying to really get in good with Alexander Spotswood. So that's about like 15 of these guys out of a group of about 50, which really means what? That the rest of them is their entourage.
They're carrying their stuff.
Exactly. So by entourage, I mean, this is a pretty amazing contingent of enslaved men and boys that are basically there, carrying all of their stuff. And when I say carrying their stuff, this is what I mean by stuff, guys. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. But basically, these guys lug a mobile bar of top shelf liquor through the mountains and have a pretty incredible time doing it. So the first night that they meet up and travel like the first 14 miles of their journey, we know that they sat down, they had a great supper, and they drank really good punch. And we know about that because the official journal keeper of this expedition is a guy named John Fontaine, and he had been hanging out with Spotswood for a while in Williamsburg. You can read a couple of years worth of this guy's journal online. A lot of it has been digitized. That's a lot of fun. If you need a drinking game by yourself and you want to drink when the Virginia gentry drinks, read this online. Take a shot when they take a shot. You'll be fine. You'll get through quarantine just fine. So he writes about this journey. And so basically from about like August 29th through the first week of September, these guys are just, they're not even really blazing a trail. They are following old Indian paths. They actually have some rangers. They have about 8, I think, rangers with them. They have 4 Indians with them. So it's not like they don't know where they're going. It's not like they're blazing a brand new path. But they're going through the woods. And Fontaine is really, really upset because all they seem to be doing is killing rattlesnakes, killing bears, and trying not to get killed by said rattlesnakes. That's like their life for a week, and no one's super happy about it. So what do? They drink, they eat, they drink, they wake up in the morning and say, my head hurts, and they don't start doing anything until like 10 a.m. in the morning. So this goes on for like
We've all been there, come on.
Yeah.
What's that?
We've all been there.
We've all been there this week.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the most, Fontaine gets really upset at one point because he says that they go through this impenetrable mass of brambles and they have to cut their way through it. They're not the ones cutting their way through it, but their clothes are torn, and I just feel so bad for these guys, and I don't want to say that they're all like delicate little gentry guys, because I know that like Bird and Beverly, they've been on these expeditions before. Spotswood, of course, has, but the way that Fontaine writes it, it really makes it sound like they're just really a bunch of delicate guys going through the woods. But it takes them about a week. Finally, on September 6th, they actually reach the Shenandoah River. And in true Virginia fashion, they have to name it something grandiose, and they named it the Euphrates, because of course it's going to be something,
the cradle of civilization.
Exactly, because again, as we mentioned before we got kicked off of Facebook, in the beginning, everything was Virginia. So of course we're going to name this wonderful river the Euphrates. The cradle of civilization, which is ironic, but anyway, so September 6th, they reach the Shenandoah River, name it the Euphrates, and of course they have to claim it for the king. So they cross the river, and they drink the health of everyone who has made the crossing. So to the crossing of the Euphrates, everyone.
Crossing of the I didn't know we had a Euphrates. I'm really.
There you go.
Now you do.
About that.
So they had to drink everyone's health at that point. This whole time, Governor Spotswood has been, by some accounts that I read, has been using all the empty liquor bottles to write little notes saying he's claiming this land in the name of the king and in the name of England, slipping these little notes in these liquor bottles and then burying them along the way. Because that's how you claim territory. And the thing that really gets me about this is, can you imagine if when we went to the moon, got this bottle, guys, I'm just gonna bury it right here.
Leave like an empty scotch bottle on the moon being like USA.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking like early 60s, let's make it like a Schlitz can,
yeah.
And inside is a note that just says dibs on it,
That's
right. And they just leave it.
I was gonna say, that's pretty legit. Like, if it's in a bottle, like that is basically the law from that point forward.
Right, so now I'm thinking about like I'm a former archaeologist. I'm thinking about all of the old Rolling Rock bottles that I found on sites, and I'm like, dude, we've been misinterpreting those Rolling Rock bottles this whole time. It's just really people claiming, you know what, this is Kate's now. Yeah. Burying that. So they're burying these bottles, and that takes place again when they cross the river. But it's really that night that things really get going, because they are able to make it to the top of the Blue Ridge, and they see these 2 mountains, and of course they have to name the mountains. One is Mount George, after our illustrious king, and then of course they name another Mount Spotswood, as of course you would. And here I'm going to read a little excerpt from you from the evening of September 6th. This is from Fontaine's journal, where he says, on the 6th, we had a good dinner, and after it, we got the men together, we loaded all of the arms, and we drank the king's health in champagne and fired a volley. So, to the king.
The king.
I had my musket loaded right now. I could like fire.
That's the sound effect we really should need. So the princess's health in Burgundy. So imagine this is nice little Burgundy here for you.
I think smaller steps here.
Okay. Fire a volley. And all the rest of the royal family.
I like how the princess gets one and the king gets one. Everyone else is like, and everybody else.
Fire a volley. So the rest of the royal family, they drank too, using, oh, excuse me, one more. The governor's health.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, throw the governor in.
Governor, why not? Okay. So they drank to everyone else. It says, we had several sorts of liquors. Virginia red wine and white wine, Irish whiskey, brandy, shrub, 2 sorts of rum, champagne, sherry, punch, water, cider, etc. So this is one night at the top of a mountain. People had to lug all of this stuff up this mountain for these guys to get completely hammered, claiming this land for king and country. They spend the night, they wake up the next morning, they are back at Germana in like 2 days. So all in all, from Germana to it's like Elkton, and then back to Germana, it's like well, I think it's like 60 miles one way. They managed to take like a week or like a week and a half to get there, and then they take 2 days coming back. They're like, all right, this is done. So
did they run out of liquor? Is that why they were moving so quick?
Yeah, see, that's what I think. I think they basically just got up there, ran out of booze, and thought, well, this isn't fun anymore, and then turned around and left. But Spotswood sends those rangers, basically, you guys go look over there. We're going home, but you guys go look over there. So here's why this was my story for epic failures. So many people claim that Spotswood is responsible for just opening up the West. And that's originally what Spotswood said he wanted to do. He said that he wanted to set an example and basically bring together a group of men that could entice the rest of Virginia to go out west. So much so that to commemorate this trip, he gave them all these cute little horseshoes made of gold. Some of them were encrusted with jewels. And to commemorate the trip, he had a little Latin phrase written on this horseshoe, which is basically like it is good, or it's beneficial to go across the mountains. I can't remember what it is in Latin, but that's the basic translation of it. So he's using that as an enticement to get these guys to go send people money, settlement over to the West. But that never happens. Not one of those guys speculates in the West at all, let alone settles there themselves. It's actually not until like 1727 that you have the first settler really trying to make a homestead out in the Shenandoah Valley. And that's actually a guy who's immigrating from Pennsylvania. He's German born and moves into the valley from Pennsylvania. And it's really not until I think Governor Gooch really starts getting people excited about the West that even really ramps up into like the 1730s. So another failure of this is there's really no measurable result of this. But then Spotswood actually writes to the Board of Trade in London and says, no, actually what I was trying to do was find a Virginia route to Lake Erie. So the idea behind that is that he knows that the French have a stronghold and a communication line with Canada, up near Lake Erie. And so Spotswood said that he wants to try to find some kind of Virginia route to Lake Erie so that he can put a Virginia settlement, an English settlement, in somewhere south of Lake Erie. And to my knowledge, did that even happen? Like at any point in time? No. And like 4 years after this, Spotswood is ousted as governor anyway. So for me, this is a really early example Virginia, or Jamestown excluded, of an epic Virginia failure, because I cannot find a real measurable result, except for the fact that this is a massive mobile frat party with a massive bar that runs out in the Blue Ridge. And the guys just go home. What
I think you hit the nail. You hit the nail on the head there, Kate. They couldn't go any further because they were out of bottles to claim the land with.
That's probably it. And the only real success story that I can find, and I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the Facebook comments. People are probably really angry at me, but the only success story I can find here is that they are drinking and firing volleys and no one shoots themselves or others. And to me, like,
that's a win.
That's a win.
It's a win-win. And the journalist says that they're getting drunk at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, getting hungry. They don't have anything to use for bait. They're trying to fish in the Shenandoah River. They're going out and catching grasshoppers and using them as bait. And I'm sorry, if I start drinking at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and you tell me to go catch grasshoppers and then use them for fish bait, that ain't happening. But they managed to do it. So
I would watch that.
Yeah.
If that was a reality show and you send all of these, highborn people out to get drunk, catch grasshoppers, and go fishing with it, I would watch that.
I mean, that's what this is. This is like Survivor with like the FFVs, isn't it? Like
pretty much. And I've glossed over a lot of history here, and people have been writing about this for ages, and a lot of historians, really again claim that, hey, this is a really seminal moment in Virginia history. This is what opens the West to settlement. And obviously there are a lot of complications there and, in and of itself, and not to downplay that, but I think it's Chris Hendricks has a great book on the backcountry and backcountry settlement. And I think he's one of the historians that actually writes, this really didn't do that much. It's more towards, the middle of the century that this really gets going. But we love our Spotswood.
We do.
I just keep thinking how things would have been different, especially like during the French and Indian War, if the French were just like by Lake Erie and they made it there and found a bottle that said it belonged to the king. Well, do they respect the bottle as like the bottle of the law now? Like, I don't
have to abide.
How do they respond to that?
It's funny because I'm glad you brought that up.
What was that going to accomplish? Well, it's okay. We're going to bury these bottles and then it's ours. We're claiming it.
So you mentioned the French. The French actually literally do something very, very similar in the middle of the 18th century. They send an expedition down the Ohio River and bury lead plates along their routes.
Yes.
And, it basically says like, this is the property, King of France, whatever, His Most Christian Majesty. And like, they've actually recovered some of these lead plates. And they're, from like Lake Erie, down through the Ohio Valley, all the way out to the Mississippi. So this is not like an isolated thing, and obviously it did just as good as putting bottles in the ground.
It's symbolic for sure, but I mean, I would take a lead plate more seriously than like an empty claret bottle with a note stuck in it.
Well, also,
to Spotswood and the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe.
Do we know that Spotswood wrote to claim it for the king, or like was he secretly saying this is Spotswood's, do we know?
Well, here's the other thing. So here's the thing with the horseshoes. They all have to start at Germanna because Spotswood has his iron forge there, right? So he's got his foundry or his forge there. Where all of the horses, there are like 70 horses that go on this journey. They all have to get shod. They all have to have horseshoes. And a number of secondary sources that I read speculate that a lot of these horses are coming from the eastern, from Williamsburg, from the peninsula area, and it wasn't all that common for horses to have horseshoes just because the terrain is different. So by Spotswood bringing everybody and all these horses, well, of course they're going to have to stop at his foundry. Like, well, you guys, we're going to have to get horseshoes here. So, I mean, I don't think that this was not calculated by Spotswood. And again, if you're a historian and you're on Facebook, please don't yell at me because this is just my opinion. I just think probably a real feather in the cap of Spotswood, but I think a fail for Virginia as a whole.
I think it's a very appropriate fail. I will drink to that.
I like it. All right. So I guess I'm up next. We're moving on into the early 19th century. Specifically kind of the decades of the early republic, 1800s, 1810s, 1820s. Huge time for internal improvements. We think of it like the National Road, taking people out west, the Erie Canal, the C&O Canal. Even right in our own backyards, we have the Ashby's Gap Turnpike that appears in the first decade of the 19th century. So a part of this that we kind of basically, Loudoun County, our area where we're at now with the Mosby Heritage Area, does not want to get left out of this era of internal improvement. And so you see a lot of groups get together, a lot of wealthy planters and businessmen getting there, putting their heads together, figuring out how they can cash in on this movement. How can they bring internal improvements to their neighborhoods so that they can make money off of them? And this leads to what was grandiosely described as the Goose Creek and Little River Navigation Company. This company, as it becomes known, has its origins in the 1830s. A group of local planters and businessmen will meet in Leesburg at what was the Laurel Brigade Hotel. The building is still there. And it's really a who's who of the local gentry. The two main driving forces behind this company are Charles Fenton Mercer. He lives down in Aldie. He's a congressman. He runs the largest milling complex in the area. War of 1812 general. I mean, this guy is the most prominent political citizen of the region. In addition to that, he's also the first president of the C&O Canal, and he serves on the Congressional Board of Roads and Canals. So if you're going to build a canal and have a navigation company, he's a good guy to have on your side. Really interesting individual. He's one of the founders of the American Colonization Society. So he's involved in a lot of different causes in the 1830s. His right-hand man in this project is going to be one of his neighbors from a few miles up the road, and that is George Carter I. He owns Oatlands, one of the largest plantations in Loudoun County. He's the great-grandson of King Carter. So, with that name comes a lot of money and a lot of political clout. He's one of the largest slaveholders in the county, one of the largest wheat growing operations in the county. He owns his own mill along Goose Creek. So obviously he's got a business interest in this company as well. And the idea behind this Goose Creek Canal Company is they're going to build a canal from the Potomac River, and they're going to bring it, basically make Goose Creek navigable to ships, to canal boats from the Potomac River to Aldie, in the very southern southeast part of Loudoun County. Just so happens to be where Charles Fenton Mercer's milling complex is. Overall, it's a distance of almost 20 miles. And the idea is, not only is Mercer's mill there, Carter's mill is there, but you've got about 24 other mills in the area. And if you can build this canal, you can get flour and grain up to the ports in Georgetown, in Alexandria. The turnaround time is going to be a matter of hours rather than a matter of days, and these guys are going to make money hand over fist. But there are problems from the start.
Of course.
Get to the problem.
Get to the problem. Get to the fail.
Yeah, this is what we want.
This all sounds too good.
At this point,
they end up in Lake Erie.
1830s. The state of Virginia is willing to front some of the money for this improvement, but the investors have to raise $40,000 to get this project off the ground. $40,000, I've tried to check what that would be in today's money, and I got a lot of different answers, but it's going to be in the millions. It's raising millions of dollars in 2020 money to get this project off the ground. That's made even harder because in 1837, we have one of the greatest financial panics in American history. The Panic of 1837 which actually, ironically, is partially brought about by investments in these kind of internal improvements and kind of the speculation that goes with it. That's going to lead to 7 years of economic depression. So $40,000 is not easy to come by in the 1830s. At the same time that they're trying to raise this money, we have a whole nother force that is entering the local economy, the transportation networks, and that is the railroad. Railroads are starting to pop up. You know, we have the B&O Railroad in the late 1820s, and railroad building takes off like a rocket in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. So as they're planning this canal, it's already like on the cusp of becoming obsolete. And to make matters worse, George Carter, like the number one guy in this, he's the president of the company. He dies in 1846. So it's going to take them like 15, 16, 17 years to raise the money to even break ground on this canal. And as I said, by the time they put a shovel in the ground, it's already pretty much yesterday's news. Nobody's using canals anymore now that railroads are becoming, the main source of transportation.
Canals the principal thing.
1849. It takes almost 20 years for them to like get this together. And of course, when they break ground, they decide they are going to call in the best guys that they can to put this canal together. It's going to be surveyed by a guy named William McNeil. William McNeil is like the foremost engineer in America. He's West Point trained. He's surveyed the C&O Canal. He surveyed the James River Canal. He surveyed the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the Kanawha Canal out in West Virginia. So he's like the most expensive guy you can get, and they pay for the best. They get the best guy to survey the route. They also go for the most expensive locks that they can get. They had the choice between like wooden locks and like stone locks, and they go for like expert stone carved locks.
Yeah.
So they break ground in 1849. It takes 2 years before the first locks are even built. The first set of locks is only like a half mile from the Potomac River. So, this gives you an idea of how long it takes to construct the Goose Creek Canal. So within a few years, they've got 7 miles of canal ready. So like a third maybe of the total length is navigable from the Potomac River. The 4 locks that are completed are, quote, not surpassed by any in the state. They're dumping money on this project. That's when they realize that they're going to have to shorten the length of the canal, because there is just not enough water. It's not feasible to make the entire 20-mile length of the canal possible. So they end up, 2 years after they start building, they end up settling for a 12-mile long canal rather than the full 20 miles. It's only going to extend as far as Ball's Mill, which is today's Evergreen Mill, still there today.
It's not the length of the canal, Travis.
Right, it's how you use it. And as we're going to find out, that is a total failure. It takes them till 1854 to just get to Ball's Mill. So they've completed the 12 miles, they're short in length. They finally get to Ball's Mill. And this is where they decide to test the canal. Because none of the contractors, these contractors that have been working for 5 years on this thing, have not gotten paid, because the canal needs to be tested before they get paid.
Is this a government project, Travis?
Is it private enterprise sometimes doesn't, we like to joke about government work, but sometimes private enterprise just does this poorly.
Yeah.
So the president of the canal company, Humphrey Powell of Middleburg, he gets a canal boat specially made in Cumberland, Maryland. It's an 11-foot by 42-foot boat made in Cumberland, the same that you see on the C&O Canal. Has it specially made up in Cumberland, has it floated all the way down the C&O, across the Potomac River, and into the Goose Creek Canal. I'm laughing because they chose to do this in the summer of 1854. This summer was one of the biggest droughts recorded in the area in generations. So the water is so low that a group of enslaved workers has to physically drag this 11 by 42 foot boat across the sandbars, across the low water, across the rapids in the Goose Creek. It takes them hours to drag this thing 12 miles to Ball's Mill. And this canal boat, they finally get it to Ball's Mill. That sits in the mill pond. The contractors get paid. 1854. By 1857, this canal boat that is still sitting in the mill pond at Ball's Mill is the only canal boat to have ever made the entire 12-mile journey up the Goose Creek Canal. And I love this because Humphrey Powell, this poor guy who was in charge of this canal company, is writing frantically to like stockholders and everything else. And he's blaming it on railroads. By 1857, there are already railroads in Loudoun County. The need for this canal has been passed for like a decade. He writes, it's little value to the state or to any of the individuals who invested in this company. He finally that year closes the books, dismantles the Goose Creek and Little River Navigation Company. And when he does, there is $1.95 in company assets on the books. Like from this $40,000 initial investment to $1.95. And I think that, combined with the fact that only one boat ever made the full journey, makes the Goose Creek Canal an epic fail.
Epic fail.
Very epic.
Who would have thought water was necessary for a canal?
One thing I will say that was not an epic fail, and to the credit of these guys, is you can actually go and visit the locks of this canal. They are still there. So that's a testament to, they spent the money on the stone locks.
They cashed out.
I'm glad they went with the legit locks, not the wooden ones.
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah,
thanks,
to,
guys.
Kephart Landing Park, and just east of Leesburg, you can actually walk down and see, the canal locks that are still in existence. And supposedly, for many, many years, you could see the ruins of the canal boat sitting in the old mill pond.
That's what I want.
I would have loved to.
That's what I want.
Was there like a celebration when the boat was dragged to it?
It doesn't really sound like it.
I think they just
people kind of realized at that point that
they just pulled up and it was someone with a trombone.
Yeah, the trombone was actually invented at Ball's Mill when the canal boat got there.
That's actually how those 4 notes actually came to be.
One note for every $10,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just unbelievable. And the thing that, you read about the history of other canals, even the C&O Canal, which, obviously was a much larger undertaking. It was never really kind of the financial boon that people thought it was going to be, and even by the time it's completed, the railroad has really taken over. These guys should have known better. You don't break ground until 1849. You should have known before they put that shovel in the ground that this was not going to be, not going to be the wave of the future. And it sure wasn't.
Literally the wave of the future.
Man, I was
like too, Anne-Marie.
I don't know if I feel really sorry for those guys, or Travis, if I'm like you should have known. I don't feel sorry for you at all. You should have known. You had so many signs.
I think with a lot of failures, even today, there's kind of that idea that you've already gone this far, you've already sunk this much money, you got to see it through to the end.
Commit.
And I almost feel like as they're watching these poor enslaved workers drag this canal boat up the thing, you got to imagine that's what's going through their head is we're already this far involved in this. We've got to, and I guess props to Powell for realizing when it was kind of
it's time.
Prospect. Yeah, it was time.
You gotta know when to fold them.
That's
right. Love it if the train just rolls right by them while they're just slowly away. And I was oh man.
Yeah.
The hair on every, blowing in the wind of the train.
Because it's the Alexandria and
was the Orange in Alexandria?
Hampshire. It's the rail line that becomes the WNOD, and I always forget the name of it. That comes in like 1856 or so. So it's a while they're working on this. And then there's, obviously other rail lines in the area. The Baltimore and Ohio is over on the other side of the river. Like, it was, it's like buying a video rental franchise in like 2005. Like, why would you do this?
It's like investing in Blockbuster.
Yeah, Blockbuster stock is so low.
Yeah.
I'll give a plug to the canal though. Tracy with Nova Parks, they're going to be doing hopefully some tours this fall where you can actually see some of the remnants. So follow Nova Parks, follow Aldi Mill.
Another great Nova Parks connection, the Aldi Mill there. That was the whole reason why this thing was being built, was to get flour and grain from this mill. So definitely check that out if you get a chance to, once we start opening things back up.
Aldi Mill don't they do a bourbon fundraiser or something?
If they don't, they should.
I feel like Tracy, it's Aldi Mill.
Yeah, I'm sure Tracy and Rich are watching. Get some bourbon in there.
Yeah, they used to do like a whiskey tasting, yeah,
that's right.
Tracy, back me up.
We should do boat races on the old canal.
We should do canal boat races in the old canal.
Yeah. I'll pull you.
Yeah, we'll get Kate to pull everybody. It'll be a lot of fun. You get a golden horseshoe if you win.
I claim this canal in the name of Travis Shaw.
Yeah, we'll bury our empty bottles along the canal lot. All right, so going from the canal, we're going to hop ahead just a few years to Joe Rizzo and the Washington Peace Conference.
Yeah, just a few years after that, I mean, the failures continue to roll in, and failed canals is not the only problem going on in Virginia. And this story starts particularly, of course, with Abraham Lincoln's election in November 1860. Just as he gets elected, there is the first wave of secession throughout the country. It starts with South Carolina in December, and 6 other Deep South states follow not long after. But there's ultimately 2 waves of secession. There's that one soon after Lincoln's election, and then there's not going to be one for several months. So there's that kind of in-between period where several states that rely on slavery but aren't part of the Deep South and have connections to the North are debating whether they want to stay within the Union or if they want to join what's forming, which is this Confederate States. For Virginia in particular, this is where a lot of the nation's eyes are on. This is an extremely prominent state. It has important foundries that would be critical for a potential new Confederate Southern nation. There's also a lot of prominent lineage here. The Virginia dynasty, the ties to the Revolution, that means a lot to a lot of Virginians. So there is a lot of division over whether they should secede from the Union, whether they absolutely should stay, or whether they should wait and see what happens to see what maybe compromises could be made and how things play out. So during this winter, in between the kind of 2 waves of secession, people are looking for a potential compromise. And compromise had been the way that the country had stayed together up to this point for decades. The Constitution compromises on slavery. 1820, the Missouri Compromise, 1833, 1850, 1854. So, I mean, this is something that people can somewhat expect, at least hope for. And stepping into that void is the former president, now 71 years old, John Tyler. He took over as president when William Henry Harrison died, so he was never elected president, but a former president nonetheless. And he went to the Virginia government and suggested that they put together some sort of convention to talk about this crisis with the border states. And the Richmond government likes the idea, but they want to open it up to the entire country. Let's get every state to send representatives. We'll meet in Washington, D.C., we'll go to the Willard Hotel, and we will find a compromise to save the Union. So that is exactly what at least the plan is. Meet in early February, 5 representatives from Virginia go, John Tyler being one of them. And ultimately there's 131 delegates that meet for this unofficial conference to try to find a compromise and save the Union once again. And if you just look at the stat sheet, it's an impressive resume for the 131 individuals who go to this conference. For example, there are 6 former cabinet members, 19 ex-governors, 14 former senators, 50 former representatives, 12 state Supreme Court justices, and of course, 1 former president, John Tyler. And John Tyler gets nominated as president of the convention. And a lot of people view this as, a great way to find potential success, saviors after all. Other people are like, what is going on here? These guys have a pretty good resume, but they're also extremely old. Like, these are all dinosaurs who are being trotted out, probably can't even find their way to Washington, D.C., and they're expected to save the country. So there's a lot of mockery about what now gets called derogatorily old gentleman's convention. Not an endearing phrase for what this is. But people mock the fact that these are old men.
Can we shorten that to the OG convention?
OG convention.
Can we make that a thing? OGs, bunch of OGs.
So people see that, again, like, these guys are past their prime. Like, they're not going to bring anything to the table. The New York Tribune, for example, describes them as, quote, no more fit to be entrusted with guidance than a bull is fitted to keep in a china shop.
Bum, 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 bum.
Slam.
So the New York Tribune's out. They're not viewing this as a success. A lot of states agree. While there's 131 delegates, and while places like Virginia view this as legitimate possibilities, a lot of states laugh at this. No state that already seceded sends anyone. They've already made their decision. A lot of northern states who are strongly Republican and are excited about Abraham Lincoln's impending presidency, they don't think there's any sort of compromise to be made. So some of them even just send people, one, just for the sake of sending it, and to watch out for their state's own interests. So they go and they meet for a few weeks, and no surprise, almost nothing's getting accomplished while they meet. They realize compromise is not very easy when you have 2 sides that don't see the need for compromise. They do get an audience with President-elect Abraham Lincoln. For James Buchanan, who is outgoing, I mean, this is a run-out-the-clock situation for Buchanan. He wants.
Speaking of epic fails, James Buchanan is an epic fail. Yeah.
We have a long list of presidents at this point that are some big-time failures. Buchanan as one of them. So he's obviously not going to do anything. Lincoln does get into D.C. This is less than a month before his inauguration. He humors them. He meets with the committee several times. He basically tells them, I was just elected on a platform that protects slavery where it already is, but it's not going to extend into the territories. There is no compromise to be made. So while he tries to appease them just by meeting with them, he also obviously sees them as no threat. This is not an official legislative body. This is not mandated by the government. This is just a bunch of old men meeting in DC, trying to find some sort of agreement that they could maybe pass off. What they find out, again, it's hard to find compromise. They can't agree on anything during those few weeks. And when they realize they better produce something before Congress adjourns, they basically just trot out a failed amendment that already was voted on and got dismissed in Congress, the Crittenden Compromise. So what the conference ultimately puts together is an amendment that they send off to Congress. And what it ultimately tries to do is reestablish the Missouri Compromise line of 3630 all the way to the Pacific. It strengthens the federal fugitive slave law. It protects slavery where it already is. But it's really nothing new that's not already been looked at by Congress. The Senate gets it. They ultimately vote on it just probably to get it out of the way. It gets dropped 28-7 in the Senate. The House of Representatives doesn't even bother to look at it or vote on it. They pay it no mind. The funny thing is the conference doesn't even agree on the amendment that they try to send and get passed. Especially Southern delegates who go don't agree with it. They don't vote for it. John Tyler, the guy who came up with this idea and was the president, he hated the amendment. He didn't support it. And he leaves the Washington conference, goes back to Richmond, and then trashes the conference and says that this was a complete disaster. When he arrives, he says, quote, "I bring you, as a result of our mission, a poor, rickety, disconnected affair not worthy of your acceptance." So John Tyler goes back from this conference meant to save the Union, and he advocates then for secession and says, just leave. We're done. Get out of the Union at this point. And then he gets himself elected to the Confederate Congress, the only president then to serve in a government, albeit briefly, against the United States like that. So what starts as him thinking that he's going to be the guy who just rides up, help save the country, ultimately ends up a few weeks later with him returning back to Richmond and saying, we're done, get out of the United States. It's time to secede. So not only did this not produce anything that could be passed as a potential compromise, but then it also shows Virginians that there is no compromise that's going to come. They need to evaluate the events as they're happening and then make a decision once again on whether they want to stay in the Union or leave.
I think in this scenario, secession is the railroad that's blazing by the Peace Convention Canal, right? Like that's where we are with this. Like, it's already happening.
Yeah, and some people, probably the people that like canals, they're thinking, this is it. We got some great people who have, done a lot of good for the country. They're, Winfield Scott gives 100 whatever salute to them when they adjourn. So there is some pageantry around it. Like this is going to be a convention that actually does something. But then most people, especially, Lincoln, Republicans, and then Southerners who aren't even paying attention to it, I mean, this is just kind of a joke to them.
I love that Lincoln is kind of the, like, oh, pat, pat, pat.
Good job.
Like,
Yeah.
Good try.
And he tries to be respectful to them. And there are a lot of, because they meet with him multiple times. And there are just a lot of examples where he, again, tries to be,
respectful.
On good terms with them. He tries to be polite.
Tries to be realistic with them.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's also like, are you kidding me? I was just elected on this platform. Now I'm supposed to go against it before I'm even president? And even with the...
You do know I have a career, right?
Yeah.
Just what every president wants to do, win on a platform and then throw it out before they even get into the office.
So I have like a observation here. We always talk about these compromises as if like it's a compromise where like both sides kind of give and take. It doesn't really sound like there's much in it for the northern states on this one. Like what's the compromise?
There's not. And again, when you're the incoming party, I mean, Northern Democrats, for the most part, are at least open to the convention, and a lot of them do support it. I mean, people like Stephen Douglas for years have been looking for some sorts of compromise. Douglas, of course, is the one who obliterates the Missouri Compromise line with the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. So the hope is that, like, restore that line. It can be, once again, the great compromise. But that literally just failed weeks before this with the Crittenden Compromise.
Right. Yeah, like
Exactly.
it's already been...
So the fact they think they could just basically redo it and pretend like it's theirs, but then add a couple of nothing sections to it that don't really change anything.
You can't compromise with an ultimatum. And that's really what secession is, right? Is like, we're not doing this, period.
Yeah, and both sides, I mean, you already had 7 states that had left, and they weren't even paying attention. Like, they weren't going to be like, oh, a 71-year-old John Tyler just came up with something like, let's completely go back and throw out the government that we're currently forming in Alabama. This is not.
Yeah, it's not like a George Washington
okay, boomer.
stepping up. It's like, yeah.
Okay, Boomer is definitely a good tagline for the Washington Peace Conference. And John Tyler's an interesting figure. I mean, like Embry in the very first History on Tap we did about pandemics, I mean, you talked about self-medication. I mean, he's a perfect example. He doesn't believe in doctors, so he really just kind of self-medicates. And he has all sorts of intestinal problems. He's got bronchitis. He has dysentery. So he keeps giving himself mercury and chalk and like other like home remedies. So that basically tells you the mindset of the guy who then is the one that is the president of this.
Make it to 71 at least. So I mean, there's that.
Aren't like his grandkids still alive? Isn't that like one of those weird facts that like
one grandson, I think.
Yeah, one grandson at Sherwood Forest.
Yeah.
Off the Route 5, close to here. Yeah.
Yeah, I've trespassed the fair though. It's a beautiful property. It's still private, but I wanted to see it.
Harrison.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's that's actually another really good segue, because it's because of that failure to get peace in the country that poor Elijah Fearing Hobart has his own epic fail story. So mine is much more of a personal look. It's a personal failure. And it's also really sad because it's not necessarily a failure of anything that Hobart himself did. It's more of a series of unfortunate events that he lives through during the Civil War. So Elijah Fearing is from Hingham, Massachusetts, in Plymouth County. His grandfather was a Revolutionary War soldier, something that's a very big source of pride for the family. Yeah, cheers. And he becomes an engraver, and he's an engraver in Albany when the Civil War breaks out. And apparently, Elijah is a really good marksman, because his immediate thought when the Civil War breaks out is that he's going to sign up a company and join an elite corps of riflemen, right? So he's going to he gets his men together, and they're going to sign up. God, what is the name? They become the 1st and 2nd U.S. sharpshooters. And you have to pass a very difficult test in order to even be considered to be part of this group. You have to hit 10 consecutive shots.
Are they related to Verdun sharpshooters?
Yeah, it's the Verdans, and they become the 1st and 2nd U.S. You're exactly right. So it's Verdun sharpshooters, and to become part of this elite group, you have to shoot 10 consecutive shots in a 10-inch diameter target set 200 yards away. So it only 2,000 men, so dinner plate size, 200 yards away, and you have to shoot 10 consecutive shots in the target, one after the other. Only 2,000 men actually qualify to be part of this company, of which apparently Hobart and his group did manage to pass that test. However, there was a shortage of guns, right? There weren't already thousands of these rifles ready to go. So at first, Verdun had put in order for just some Springfield rifles until they could get another order in. But then while training, he comes across the 1859 Sharps rifle, which is perfect for sharpshooters for a couple of reasons, including, one of which is because it's a breech loading rifle. So instead of standing there and loading your gunpowder down the muzzle of your gun, you can actually load it in from the back, which means you can be lying down, you can be crouched, you can remain hidden. And because it's a breech loader as well, the actual cartridges they're using, instead of ripping it off, pouring it down, doing the ramrod, again, you load the whole thing in the gun and you can shoot it. So it's much easier. You can shoot almost three times as many shots, as many rounds per minute. And the gun itself, the charge coming out of it is at 1,200 feet per second as opposed to the usual 900. It was like, it's faster, it's more lethal, it's easier to use, but it's going to take a lot longer to get 1,000 Sharps rifles made to outfit this group. So poor Hobart and his group of guys that he had signed up, they end up getting smushed over to the 93rd New York Infantry instead. They get removed from this like really cool, kind of badass, sexy group of sharpshooters, and now they're in the infantry. And already there's some mumbling in the ranks, of which, Hobart is the captain of this company, but he convinces them that, it's fine, we're in the infantry now, let's go fight a war. So that's at the end of 1861. So for the winter of 1861 to 62, they're actually at Rikers Island, where they're going to winter. They're going to train there. And in the springtime, in March, they're finally going to be sent down to D.C. And then eventually to the Peninsula Campaign. Well, when they get to D.C., apparently the company is so over it that they actually lay down their arms and refuse to fight, including Hobart. So they're all put under arrest for just one day. They're put under arrest until they decide to, okay, fine, okay, we'll go do the war. We'll go fight. Fine. We made it this far. We'll do it. So that's March 28th. They march over to Alexandria, and their baggage hasn't caught up with them yet. I know a lot of people can sympathize with this, any of our frequent flyers. They're in Alexandria. None of their baggage has arrived, so they don't have tents. They don't have any shelter. And so they're actually sleeping on the ground in a field that night, and it snows. 8 inches of snow on top of these poor, miserable, dejected Company B of the 93rd New York. I know, sad violin. Womp, womp, womp. So they managed to get through that night, and within the next 2 days, they're put on a boat and they're shipped down to Fortress Monroe. When they get down there, they again have to sleep outside, which is a bummer, and then finally go down to Hampton, Virginia. So now the ruins of Hampton, where there had been fighting. They get down to Hampton. They still don't have tents. They still don't have shelters. It's now 4 days on that they haven't had shelter. And that night they sleep in a graveyard with no tents and no shelter. The next night they're in a swamp with no tents and no shelter, and it rains, and they all get flooded out of their crappy swamp camp. So this is the very illustrious beginning of the 93rd New York, and poor Elijah Hobart, the captain of the Company B, trying to make the best of it. It's also interesting because at this point, when they're actually going to be sent into more active areas, that they have to send over 100 men back to Norfolk because they're sick now, because they've been sleeping outside without any
snow, rain, swamp, looking at what
graveyard. It's just, they're not, Hobart's not having a great time. So finally, they go down there. So they're part of the final stages of the siege at Yorktown. A lot of the 93rd there is going to be set up for
the other siege at Yorktown.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. Second.
The lame siege at
one.
Yorktown.
Different one. Part 2. So they're down there for that part of the Peninsula campaign from April, May into June of 1862. And during that time, Hobart is, again, part of Company B. Sometimes they're enlisted in doing guard duty for McClellan. Sometimes they're helping to set up hospital tents in town. Eventually, they end up at White House Landing when, of course, the Peninsula Campaign is, told to wrap it on up and get back to D.C. At this point, Hobart is assigned duty to escort Confederate prisoners from their White House Landing back to Fortress Monroe. And so he, gets them all together. They make to Fort Monroe. When they get to the prison at Fort Monroe, he's told, oh, no, actually, you have to take them up to Delaware instead. That's where those prisoners need to go. So we're now in mid-July of 1862. Hobart says, okay, so he takes his prisoners, all the way up there, just outside of Wilmington. And by the time he gets back on July 22nd, he gets back to camp where the rest of his unit is, and he's immediately put under arrest for being absent without leave from his regiment. He was doing his job. So he gets unceremoniously booted out of the army, and ends up going to Washington, D.C., where he goes to work as an engraver for the Treasury Department. He had worked as an engraver before, of course, in Albany. Now he's doing that job again in Washington, D.C. But unfortunately, Elijah Hobart's trials and tribulations are not over. About a year and a half later, 2 years, really. So July 4th, 1864, Elijah Hobart, I know, as he Travis's face, Elijah Hobart decides that he's going to go on a little pleasure boat ride to Harper's Ferry and back for the 4th of July. And so they're using this, canal. And their little canal boat is called the Flying Cloud. And so for the holiday, they have cigars, they have liquor, they have food. They're going to have a fun day out on the water. And some of you in the audience may know what's going on in Harper's Ferry on July 4th of 1864. It's kind of being occupied by Jubal Early, who is trying to push Franz Sigel out of the town so that he can make a move on Maryland. So I don't know exactly what Hobart encounters when he's in Harper's Ferry, but it ends up being his return trip that's the big problem. So he's coming back eastward from Harper's Ferry. He's nearing the little boat. They're a little party, about 20 folks that are on the boat, and they're nearing Point of Rocks on the other side of the Potomac, and he gets stuck at lock house number 28, just outside of Point of Rocks, because this jerk face, Colonel Mosby, has decided to make a raid on Point of Rocks at this very moment that his boat is stuck here in the lock house. So Mosby and his Rangers are actually making a raid on Point of Rocks, where the Loudon Rangers are stationed. Just a few different Union detachments are up there, as a way to number one, to get supplies. They're going to raid all the stores on Point of Rocks, but number two, to create a hassle to try and take some of the attention away from Early there in Harper's Ferry. So at this point, similar to the failed Goose Creek Canal, the water is low in the Potomac right now, so it's fordable at almost any point. And the Rangers are able to literally just cross the river swimming, like on their horses. And there, you can imagine, there's the river, the canal, and then Point of Rocks. So here Hobart is on the Flying Cloud in between the Rangers and Point of Rocks, the town. And there are a couple of conflicting records of how it actually is that Hobart meets his untimely end, that either he refused to surrender to the Confederates and was summarily shot, or he was just turning to one of his friends and saying, "We're in range, you jump and I'll follow you," and then he gets shot. But ultimately, poor Elijah Hobart is shot through the head and dies there on the canal boat on the Flying Cloud. And this isn't even a footnote in the Rangers' records of what's going on, because they ride in through town, they loot all 5 stores, they've got fabric and bonnets, they find an eagle cake that was stashed in the headquarters of the one of the Union. Yeah, the eagle cake is a whole other story. And they're gallivanting around, they go home, and all the Rangers have bonnets on their head and they're making fun of it. They're having a great time. They have a great 4th of July. They also, one thing they do note though, is that they've ransacked a canal boat of cigars and liquor and some provisions. So we know that, we know they looted Hobart's poor canal boat there. Hobart himself,
they wrecked his party barge. That's not cool. They
wrecked his party barge. It was a golden horseshoes level party barge, and then they just hang. So poor Elijah Hobart is at first buried there near Point of Rocks, but then sometime later he's disinterred and he's moved back up to his hometown in Massachusetts. So it's not an epic failure in terms, I think, of the scale of any one thing that happened to poor Elijah Hobart, but in like the kind of Odysseus style journey that he took, of one really unfortunate thing after another happening to Hobart. There is one silver lining though. After the fact, his record was amended to write that he was not dishonorably discharged from the Army. So now his official record is that he was just discharged. So he's reclaimed some of the honor from what had happened.
Too little, too late.
It's a little too little, a little too late. But it's an incredible story, because I think we all have an idea of how much it sucked to be a soldier, and this was one really good example of just how unpleasant and unfortunate it could be. Despite earnestly wanting to do the right thing and going to fight for the Union, it doesn't end well for Elijah Hobart.
Hey, you're a great shot. You're going to join the Berdan Sharpshooters. You're
right. Join the Berdan Sharpshooters. Join the infantry. Sleep outside in a snowstorm. Sleep outside in a graveyard. Sleep outside in a swamp. Go escort these prisoners. You're fired for taking too long. We didn't know about it. Go on a pleasure cruise on the Potomac during a wartime.
He was just trying to have a good time, okay?
Just trying to have a good time. Hopefully that's on his.
What happened to the guy he was with? Do you know?
So of the 20 people he was with, there were only 1 or 2 others that were killed or injured. Everyone else was able to like get off the boat or lay low or whatever it was. And they were stuck there at the lock house because whoever was supposed to be running the lock, of course, saw that there was an engagement going on and like refused to like just shut themselves in their house, kind of a thing. But there were a few civilians who were injured and killed during the Calico raid, which is what the Rangers called it afterwards.
Yeah, a few years ago, we actually did a tour along the C&O Canal and stood at the lock and told that story, which is why I remembered it so vividly. But, you can't make this stuff up.
Just that poor guy.
Yeah.
So if he wouldn't have been discharged, if he wouldn't have been imprisoned, none of that, I mean, the trajectory of the rest of his life would have been completely different. So I'm kind of not impressed that the whole dishonorable thing was expunged from the record, because it's like, well, it's your fault.
He still died. Yeah, it's one of those things that he, it's every bit just as possible if he had stayed with the regiment, he would have died in one of the many conflicts they fought in, but at least he would have died like with his boots on or in his, whatever it is.
Yeah, instead of being shot down on a canal boat,
On a canal, on your party boat, on the 4th of July. Yeah.
This does remind me, because everything always circles back in my head to some kind of Monty Python sketch. And I don't know if you guys are like Monty Python fans, but
yeah, lay it on me.
Yeah, this does remind me. It's Eric Idle coming into Graham Chapman, and he says, "I'd like to leave the army, sir." And Graham Chapman says, "Why?" He goes, "Because it's dangerous."
Because it's dangerous. Someone could get, if there's a big war, a really, really big war, someone could get hurt.
That's right. Killed, sir. Proper killed.
It's weird where our brains go. I was thinking Seinfeld the entire time for all these stories, like especially when Kate, you were talking. I was like, I can see Jerry Seinfeld having a skit about like finders keepers with the bottle.
That's right. Right. So I do feel like there is a running thread throughout all of our stories, and maybe, I think for yours too. Like, I think it's ego. Like, there's a massive amount of like. I don't know if it's ego so much in a bad way, or like stick-to-itiveness or tenacity or something that like maybe
it's a delicate balance between like being obtuse and being tenacious.
Yes.
Right?
I think that's it. And like what we were talking about before we really got started, the doohickey arundel, like, I've invented this new mortar. It's made of wood. I'm going to fire it. And everyone around him is going, no! And it literally explodes in his face. So it's just like, no, this is a thing, and damn it, I'm going to see it through. And no one else might agree with me, but
these are also a lot of manly stories. I don't necessarily want to be that guy, but not a lot of ladies out here blowing themselves up and stuff.
I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong.
Man. I'm trying to think of some good. What are some good like female Virginia epic fails?
Typhoid Mary was a pretty good fail.
I'll give you Typhoid Mary.
Not Virginia, but
I mean, if your name's Typhoid Mary, I feel like you have to be a failure.
Or unless you meant to do it, in which case you really did a good job.
Yeah, in which case you excelled.
That's right.
Any good questions coming in?
No, I think we've repulsed people by all the failure. No questions, Kearney. But yeah, if you have any final questions.
We're just putting things in perspective. Like, it could be worse, I guess.
I think it's an example of like all of these failures happen, and some of them were more severe than others. Like only one of them had the fate of a nation at stake. But the idea that there can be failures in our lives, but we become better known for other things that happen, right? Like hardly anyone's heard of the Goose Creek Canal. However, people know Charles Fenton Mercer. It's something like that. A failure does not define you, even if you're Hobart.
There you go. I like that.
uplifting message.
All right. Well, with that uplifting message, maybe that's probably a good place to stop for tonight. Before we go, though, just want to remind folks, if you enjoy programming like this, please think about supporting the Mosby Heritage Area Association, either through a membership or through donations. We also have a lot of good upcoming content coming up that you can join in on. We have tomorrow our Live at 5 program, 5 p.m. We'll be talking to Karen Hughes White. She's one of the founders of the Afro-American Historical Association of Fauquier County. She's going to be talking about the African-American communities there in Fauquier. Again, next Thursday, we'll be doing the History and Tap thing. Any programs coming up at the Loudon Museum that people should know about, Joe?
Yeah, just keep focused on our website and on Facebook. We post it too. Every Friday we have a new blog. Sometimes they are blogs from Loudon teachers talking about different strategies and potentially coping mechanisms coming forward if this goes any further. Now I'm coughing over it. But yeah, keep focusing on the blog. Sometimes about teaching. Other times we focus on our collection. So we try to do it in mix too, but let us know as well if you want hear any topics. Anything in the blog too, just let us know. Membership program as well, as you mentioned. We both have membership programs. It's a big way for us to keep support and a good way to stay connected with our organizations as well.
Now, Kate, I know Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation has been doing a lot of amazing programming, really cool, unique stuff. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking. So if you check us out over on Facebook, you can find us by searching Jamestown Settlement / American Revolution Museum at Yorktown, or find us on our website, which is www.historyisfun.org. We've got a lot of really great material for kids right now, and support for teachers and parents and things like that. But for adults, we are starting our own History Happy Hour series, which will be every Thursday at 5 p.m. And that's headed up by our Director of Curatorial Services, Luke Pecoraro, and those are going to be a lot of fun. So please
do the
check
back-to-back, do Jamestown-Yorktown.
Yeah. Free game, History on Tap.
It's a history doubleheader. Go with the History Hour and roll right into History on Tap.
Yeah. So we got a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool programming. My colleagues yesterday live streamed from a dugout canoe. So that's pretty awesome in the middle of the James River. So check us out on our Facebook page and our website for more info.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was wonderful.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun. I love to talk about history and drink really good beer. That's just the two best things.
I agree. We also got confirmation from Aldi Mill that they are doing a whiskey dinner the second week in September, I think. So
perfect.
Ooh.
Check us out. Come visit us all on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and keep in touch for more History on Tap coming to you next week.
Cheers, guys.